A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Welcome to episode 1099 of My Weird Prompts. I am your host, Korn, and today we are tackling the most significant geopolitical shift of the 21st century. It has been 12 days since the world changed. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated massive series of strikes that decapitated the Iranian leadership and targeted over 5,000 sites across the Islamic Republic. We are now living in the aftermath of the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the controversial rise of his son Mojtaba to the throne. This is no longer a shadow war. This is a direct, high-intensity conflict involving 9 countries and counting. Today we are going to look at what has been achieved, what has been lost, and whether this is the beginning of a democratic Iran or the start of a regional fire that no one can put out. Joining me for this round 1 opening statement discussion is a panel of experts and observers who have been tracking this since the beginning. We have Herman Poppleberry, our deep dive analyst who brings the data and the technical nuance. We have Raz, who is looking at the hidden agendas and the dots that the mainstream media might be missing. We have Dorothy, who is here to give us the hard reality of the risks and the human cost. We have Jacob Longman, a resident optimist, who sees a path forward through the chaos. And finally, we have Bernard Higglebottom, a veteran journalist who has reported from the front lines of the Middle East for decades. We are going to hear from each of them today to set the stage for where this conflict goes next. Herman, you have been buried in the reports from Central Command and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Give us the technical and strategic state of play as of March 11th, 2026. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Korn. To understand where we are, we have to look at the sheer scale of the kinetic activity over the last 12 days. United States Central Command has confirmed strikes on 5,042 distinct targets within Iranian territory. This was not just a symbolic show of force. This was a systematic dismantling of the Iranian integrated air defense system, their hardened nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordow, and the command structures of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. From a purely military standpoint, the initial 24 hours were a masterclass in joint force operations. By removing Ali Khamenei in the opening wave, the coalition achieved a level of psychological paralysis that we have not seen since the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. However, we must be precise about what military victory looks like here. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not a standard army. It is an institution with between 150,000 and 190,000 active members, plus a besieged paramilitary network that claims millions of reservists. While we have degraded their ability to launch massive, coordinated ballistic missile volleys, they have still managed to fire over 500 missiles and 2,000 drones at regional targets since the conflict began. The technical data suggests that while their primary manufacturing sites are smoking ruins, their dispersed launch sites and underground missile cities remain a persistent threat. We are also seeing the European Union and Argentina finally catching up to the reality on the ground by formally designating the Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. This is crucial because it provides the legal framework for the total financial decapitation we discussed back in episode 1009. The question now is one of institutional resilience. Can the new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, maintain control over a fractured military? The theological legitimacy of his succession is in tatters. The concept of the guardianship of the jurist was never intended to be a hereditary monarchy. By forcing through his election on March 8th, the regime has signaled that it is no longer a religious cause, but a survivalist clique. My analysis of the internal data suggests that the clerical establishment in Qom is deeply divided, and that friction is just as dangerous to the regime as a B-2 Spirit bomber. We are looking at a military success that has created a massive political vacuum, and the data on how that vacuum gets filled is currently very volatile.
Thank you, Herman. That gives us a clear picture of the military degradation, but it leaves open the question of why this happened when it did. Raz, you have been looking at the timing of these strikes and the players behind the scenes. What is your take on the opening of this war?
Thanks, Korn. Look, Herman gives you the numbers, but I am here to talk about the timing, because the timing is everything. Isn't it a bit too convenient that these strikes happened exactly when a nuclear deal was within reach? On February 27th, the Omani foreign minister was shouting from the rooftops that a deal was done. Iran had agreed to halt uranium stockpiling. They were ready to let the inspectors in. And then, hours later, boom. The most successful diplomatic track in a decade is literally vaporized. You have to ask yourself, who wanted this war so badly that they had to sabotage a peace deal that was already on the table? Follow the money and the power. Steve Witkoff was running those back channels in Geneva and Muscat for the Trump administration. He had the Iranians right where he wanted them. But then the strikes happen, and Trump is demanding unconditional surrender. It feels like a classic bait and switch. I suspect that the diplomacy was never the goal. The diplomacy was the tether to keep the Iranian leadership in place, to keep them stationary and focused on a piece of paper while the target coordinates were being finalized. And let us talk about Mojtaba Khamenei. His father is dead, and within a week he is the Supreme Leader. That does not happen by accident in a complex system like Iran. There are rumors that the succession was planned long before the first bomb dropped. Is it possible that certain elements within the Iranian state, or even within the Revolutionary Guard Corps, saw the writing on the wall and cut a deal to trade the old man for a new, more manageable regime? It looks like a dynastic coup disguised as a foreign invasion. And look at the Houthis in Yemen. They are the most aggressive proxy Iran has, yet they have been sitting on their hands since October of 2025. They have a deal with the United States to stay out of it. Why? Because the plan was always to isolate the head of the snake and let the proxies wither or be bought off. This is a managed escalation. The school strike that killed 175 students? That is the kind of event that changes the narrative overnight. It makes the coalition look like the aggressors and rallies the global south against the west. Was that a mistake? Or was it a calculated move to ensure this conflict lasts long enough to reshape the entire map of the Middle East? That is what they want you to think it was a military necessity, but I see a much larger architectural change being forced on the region.
A managed escalation is a provocative way to put it, Raz. Dorothy, you have been looking at the consequences of that escalation, and you do not see a managed outcome. You see something much darker. Tell us what you are seeing.
Korn, I think Rez is giving far too much credit to the idea that anyone is in control of this. What we're witnessing is the beginning of a regional collapse that we have been warning about for years. Mark my words, this is exactly how the Great War started in 1914, with people thinking it would be over by Christmas and that a few surgical strikes would settle the matter. Since February 28th, we have seen Iran retaliate against 9 different countries. This is not a contained war. We are seeing missiles falling in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These are the lifebloods of the global energy market, and they are now in the crosshairs. The humanitarian toll is already staggering. While Herman talks about 5,000 targets, we have to talk about the 1,300 civilians confirmed dead. The strike on that girls' school in Tehran is a stain that will not be washed away by talk of strategic objectives. It is the perfect recruiting tool for an insurgency that will last for decades. And let us look at Lebanon. Israel has authorized a ground invasion. Central Beirut is being hit. Over 600 people are dead in Lebanon in less than 2 weeks. We are seeing the total destabilization of a sovereign nation that was already on the brink of failure. Yes, the Lebanese government officially banned Hezbollah's military activities. But do you really think a piece of paper from Beirut is going to stop a battle-hardened militia with 25,000 missiles left? This is a recipe for a multi-front war of attrition that will drain the United States and Israel of resources and political will. The Revolutionary Guard Corps is not going to just surrender because Trump demands it. They are following the Hezbollah blueprint. They are going underground. They are dispersing into the civilian population. They are turning every basement in Tehran into a drone factory. We are setting ourselves up for a repeat of Iraq and Afghanistan. but on a much larger scale and against a much more sophisticated enemy. People are not taking the risk of a global spillover seriously enough. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, or if the Iranian regime decides that if they are going down, they are taking the global economy with them, we are looking at a catastrophe that no amount of military hardware can fix. This is not a victory. It is the opening of a tomb.
Dorothy paints a grim picture of a war without an exit strategy. Jacob, you usually have a different perspective on these historical turning points. Where is the silver lining in all of this?
Look, I know it seems bad right now, and Dorothy's concerns are valid. But here is the thing. We are seeing the literal walls of a 40-year prison being torn down. For the first time since 1979, the Iranian people can see a path to a normal life. We have to look at the numbers that really matter. 89% of Iranians surveyed support a democratic political system. 89%. The protests that started in late 2025 have spread to over 100 cities. These people are not just protesting for cheaper bread, they are protesting for the end of a theological dictatorship that has held them hostage for 2 generations. The death of Ali Khamenei, while violent, has shattered the myth of the regime's invincibility. When the shadow of the Supreme Leader is removed, the light starts to get in. And look at what is happening in Lebanon. For years we said the Lebanese government was a puppet of Hezbollah. But now they have officially banned Hezbollah's military activities. They have ordered their security forces to stop the attacks. That is a massive, historic shift in the regional power balance. It shows that even the neighbors of Iran are tired of being used as human shields for the Guard Corps' ambitions. I think we are seeing the birth pangs of a new Middle East. Yes, it is messy, and yes, the costs are high, but the alternative was a nuclear-armed Iran led by a dying zealot. We have a chance now to support a democratic transition. Even Reza Pahlavi, the former crown prince, is seeing a surge in support as a potential figurehead for stability. The Iranian people are highly educated, they are globally connected, and they are ready for a change. If we can move past the initial kinetic phase and focus on supporting the internal uprising, we could see a peaceful, democratic Iran within our lifetime. This is not 1914. This is 1989. This is the Berlin Wall coming down, and the wall just happens to be made of IRGC bunkers. We should be optimistic about the fact that the most dangerous regime in the world is currently in a state of total disarray. The opportunity for a lasting peace is greater now than it has ever been.
1989 or 1914? That is the central question. Bernard, you have been on the ground. You have seen the reality of these conflicts beyond the briefing rooms. How does this look to a reporter who has covered this region for decades?
Corn. I have covered 5 of these regional flare-ups, and they always look cleaner on a map than they do on the ground. I was in Tehran in '79, I was in Baghdad in 2003, and I can tell you that unconditional surrender is a very easy thing to say in Washington, but a very hard thing to enforce in a country of 85 million people. The reality on the ground right now is one of extreme confusion. I have spoken to contacts inside Iran who say the protests are indeed massive, but they are also leaderless. There is no Mandela here. There is no Václav Havel. You have the monarchists, you have the liberals, you have the various ethnic minorities, and they all want the regime gone, but they have no plan for what happens on day 2. And while the strikes have been effective, the Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just a military. They are a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. They own the construction companies, the telecommunications, the banks. You cannot just bomb an economy out of existence. They are already shifting their assets into shadow networks. They have been preparing for this Hezbollah blueprint for 20 years. They want to be an insurgency, not a government. Regarding the military situation, the ground invasion of Lebanon is where the real meat of this conflict is going to be. I have seen the reports of 600 dead, but the casualty numbers for the Israeli Defense Forces are also going to start climbing once they hit the Litani River. Hezbollah is degraded, sure, but they are fighting on their home turf, and they have tunnels that the coalition hasn't even mapped yet. As for the Trump administration's demand for surrender, it is a high-stakes gamble. If you don't give a regime a way out, they will fight until the last building is standing. That is how you get a war of attrition. I have seen the rubble in Beirut and the smoke over Tehran, and it reminds me of the early days of the Iran-Iraq War. Back then, everyone thought it would be a quick victory for Saddam, and it turned into an 8-year slaughter. We have to be very careful about assuming that the Iranian state is just going to collapse like a house of cards. They have a deep-seated nationalist streak. Even the people who hate the mullahs don't necessarily love being bombed by foreign powers. The school strike in Tehran has already started to sour the mood of the middle class who are sitting on the fence. I've reported on enough of these to know that the middle of the war is always the most deceptive part. We are in the middle of the storm right now, and anyone who tells you they know exactly how the wind is going to blow is selling you something.
That is a sobering reality check, Bernard. Thank you. We have heard 5 very different takes on the last 12 days. We have Herman's technical analysis of the 5,000 strikes, Raz's questions about the timing in the Omani deal, Dorothy's warnings of a regional collapse, Jacob's hope for a democratic uprising, and Bernard's grounded reporting on the difficulty of the task ahead. It is clear that while the opening strikes were a tactical success, the strategic outcome is still very much in doubt. The questions remain: can the Revolutionary Guard Corps be truly defeated? Will the Iranian people seize this moment for regime change, or will they rally to the flag? And can this conflict be contained before it drags the entire world into a war of attrition? I have some follow-up questions for each of you, and I want to give you a chance to respond to what you have heard from your fellow panelists. We will dive into all of that in round 2. Stay with us. All right, now that we have heard from everyone, it is time for round 2. I want to start by drilling down into the central tension of this conflict, the unconditional surrender doctrine. President Trump has made it clear that there will be no negotiations until the Revolutionary Guard Corps is dismantled and the regime effectively dissolves. Herman, Bernard raised a critical point about the Guard Corps being an economic conglomerate that cannot be destroyed by missiles alone, while Dorothy warned that these strikes are creating a multi-generational insurgency. From a data-driven perspective, how do you respond to the idea that your surgical strikes are merely scratching the surface of a much deeper and more resilient institutional monster?
Well, Korn, I think Bernard is absolutely right to highlight the economic footprint of the Guard Corps, but we have to look at the specific physiology of that institutional monster. While it is true that you cannot bomb an accounting ledger, you can certainly paralyze the systems that allow those ledgers to function. My analysis of the last 72 hours of Treasury Department data shows that the tactical strikes on command centers were synchronized with a massive cyber offensive targeting the electronic clearinghouses of the bonyads, those massive religious foundations that Bernard mentioned. We are seeing a 78% drop in the Guard Corps internal capital flow because their digital architecture was dismantled alongside their physical bunkers. This is not just about kinetic energy, it is about functional decapitation. I also want to address what Dorothy said regarding the opening of a tomb and the risk of a long-term insurgency. While the human cost is undeniably tragic, particularly the strike on the school in Tehran, we have to look at the internal logistics of the Guard Corps. The data on Operation Sentinel suggests that desertion rates within the Basijah paramilitary have spiked by 42% since the death of Ali Khamenei. An insurgency requires a cohesive command structure and a reliable supply chain. By targeting 5,042 distinct nodes, the coalition has not just killed individuals, they have shattered the connective tissue of the regime. The technical reality is that you cannot run a sophisticated insurgency if your encrypted communication networks are dark and your middle management is in hiding or dead. To Raz's point about the Omani deal being a missed opportunity, I have to push back with the latest findings from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Their classified briefing from late February, which I have been reviewing, indicated that the Iranian regime had already diverted enough uranium to reach 90% enrichment at a secret site near Semnan. The diplomacy that Raz is championing was being used as a strategic smokescreen. The data shows that the regime was less than 3 weeks away from a breakout capacity. In that context, the military strikes were not an interruption of peace, but a preemptive disruption of a nuclear reality that would have been irreversible.
Raz, Herman just challenged your entire premise by citing International Atomic Energy Agency data that shows Iran was only 3 weeks away from a nuclear breakout, which would make the diplomacy you mentioned a tactical smokescreen. How do you respond to the idea that these strikes were not a sabotage of peace, but a necessary, last-second intervention to prevent a nuclear-armed dictatorship.
Oh, Herman, I love it when you quote those classified briefings from the very organizations that are funded by the people who want this conflict to happen. It is the perfect loop, is it not? You give me numbers and data points provided by the intelligence community, the same community that told us there were mobile weapons labs in Iraq and yellow cake in Niger. That 3-week breakout window is a classic trope. It is the magic number they pull out of a hat whenever they need to justify a preemptive strike to a skeptical public. If they were truly 3 weeks away, why strike on February 28th? Why not February 10th? I will tell you why. Because the Omani deal was actually going to work, and a diplomatic success is the one thing the military-industrial complex cannot afford. It ruins the return on investment for the 5,042 targets you were so excited about. And Jacob, I appreciate your optimism about the 89% of Iranians who want democracy. I really do. But let us be real here. You see the Berlin Wall coming down, but I see a new wall being built with Western silicon and surveillance tech. You mentioned Reza Pahlavi as a figurehead for stability. Isn't it convenient that a Western-educated royal is suddenly the face of a supposedly organic uprising? This is not a grassroots revolution. It is a regime change operation with a fresh coat of paint. They are not giving the Iranian people a democracy. They are giving them a board of directors. Follow the money. Who is going to get the contracts to rebuild those 5,000 sites Herman's friends just blew up? It will not be Iranian firms. It will be the same megacorporations that have been lobbying for a hard line on Tehran for 20 years. Bernard mentioned the school strike in Tehran and how it soured the middle class. He thinks it was a tactical error by a pilot or a software glitch. I think it was a calculated psychological operation. You create a tragedy so horrific that the world demands an end to the old guard at any cost. It is the Hegelian dialectic in action. You create the problem, you wait for the public reaction, and then you provide the pre-planned solution. The solution in this case is Mojtaba Khamenei being a temporary placeholder while the coalition prepares their hand-picked successor. Even Herman's point about the digital decapitation is a fantasy. You can't delete an ideology with a virus, and you can't kill a shadow network by turning off the lights. They've been operating in the dark for 40 years.
Dorothy, Jacob has framed this as a 1989 moment, the falling of a Berlin Wall that will lead to a democratic Iranian state. He believes the sheer will of the Iranian people will overcome the chaos we are seeing. Is he missing a fundamental shift in the landscape? Or are you perhaps being too quick to dismiss the possibility of a positive outcome?
Jacob is not just missing the landscape, he is hallucinating a garden in the middle of a graveyard. To compare this to the fall of the Berlin Wall is a historical insult. In 1989, we had a Soviet leadership that had lost its will to kill. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has spent 47 years perfecting the art of the massacre. Jacob mentions that 89% of Iranians want democracy, but he forgets that history is written by the 1% who are willing to pull the trigger. We saw this in Syria. We saw this in Libya. When you decapitate a regime without a viable, unified successor, you do not get a Jeffersonian democracy. You get a decade of scorched earth. Herman talks about 5,000 targets and digital decapitation, as if this were a video game where you win by clearing the map. But you cannot delete the resentment of a population that just saw 175 children vaporized in a Tehran school. That is not a technical glitch, Herman. It is a generational blood feud. By destroying the formal command structure, we have actually made the world more dangerous. We have traded a rational, state actor enemy for 20,000 independent cells who no longer have a supreme leader to restrain them. We are moving from a chess match to a barroom brawl with broken bottles. Mark my words, the insurgency that is being born in the rubble of those 5,000 sites will make the Iraq insurgency look like a summer stroll. And let us talk about the regional spillover. 9 countries targeted. 9. We are seeing the total collapse of the security architecture of the Persian Gulf. If the United States thinks it can just demand unconditional surrender and then walk away, they are delusional. This is a commitment that will last 50 years and cost trillions of dollars. We are opening a tomb, and we have no idea what is going to crawl out of it.
Jacob, Dorothy just described your outlook as a hallucination in a graveyard, and Bernard warned that these protests are leaderless and prone to a long-term bloody vacuum. If there is no Mandela or Václav Havel to step in, how do you prevent this from becoming the multi-generational blood feud that Dorothy is so terrified of?
Look, I know it is fashionable to be cynical, And Dorothy's warnings are grounded in a very specific kind of historical trauma, but we have to stop treating the Iranian people as if they are incapable of self-governance. The leaderless nature of the protests is actually their greatest strength. In 1979, the revolution was hijacked by a single charismatic leader. In 2026, there is no single neck for the regime to wring. It is a decentralized, organic movement. When I look at the data, I see a population that is more secular, more educated, and more connected than the Eastern Europeans were in '89. To Bernard's point about the lack of a Mandela, I would argue that the Mandela of Iran is the collective memory of the last 40 years of failure. They don't need a savior, they need the boot off their necks. And regarding the unconditional surrender demand, yes, it is risky. But what was the alternative? Another decade of shadow wars? Another decade of Hezbollah holding Lebanon hostage? We are finally being honest about the fact that this regime cannot be reformed. It must be replaced. The fear in the regime's eyes is real. You can see it in Mojtaba Khamenei's first speech. He didn't sound like a supreme leader. He sounded like a man hiding in a bunker. We have to have the courage to see this through. If we flinch now, if we go back to the Omani track that Raz loves so much, we are just giving the Guard Corps time to rebuild their missile cities. This is the moment of maximum leverage. We should be leaning in, not backing away.
Bernard, Herman just argued that the coalition has achieved a functional decapitation of the Revolutionary Guard Corps through digital and kinetic paralysis. Based on your decades of reporting from these conflict zones, is he overestimating the impact of technology on an organization that has survived 40 years of sanctions and isolation?
Korn, I have a lot of respect for Herman's spreadsheets, but spreadsheets do not win wars. I have sat in the tea houses of Isfahan and the back rooms of Beirut, and I can tell you that the Revolutionary Guard Corps is not a digital entity. It is a social and tribal one. You can shut down their bank accounts, but they have been running a Hawala-based shadow economy since before the internet was a glimmer in the Pentagon's eye. They deal in cash, in gold, and in favors. You cannot cyber attack a suitcase full of $100 bills. My concern is that the coalition is falling into the same trap as 2003, the belief that high-tech warfare can solve low-tech political problems. The unconditional surrender demand is particularly dangerous because it ignores the Persian concept of face. If you leave them with nothing, they will give you nothing but blood. I am seeing reports from the Lebanese border that the Israeli ground invasion is meeting much stiffer resistance than the airstrikes suggested. Hezbollah is not a government, it is a part of the soil in southern Lebanon. You can ban their military activity on a piece of paper in Beirut, but that paper doesn't stop an anti-tank missile from a hidden tunnel. We are entering a phase where the air power advantage begins to diminish and the human cost begins to skyrocket. The school strike in Tehran is a perfect example. It doesn't matter if it was a mistake. In the eyes of the region, it is a signature. It defines the coalition's intent. And that intent is being read as total destruction, not liberation. That is how you turn a democratic uprising into a nationalist defense. We are at a tipping point where the Iranian people's hatred of the mullahs might be eclipsed by their anger at the foreign powers dropping bombs on their children. I've seen this movie before, and it usually ends with a long, slow crawl through the mud.
We have covered a lot of ground today, and the divide on this panel reflects the deep uncertainty of the world outside our studio. Herman gives us a picture of a regime whose physical and digital infrastructure is in ruins, while Raz suggests that the entire conflict might be a managed theater designed to bypass a peace deal that was too close for comfort. Dorothy warns of a regional collapse that echoes the start of the Great War, while Jacob sees the birth of a new, democratic era in the Middle East. And Bernard, our voice of experience, reminds us that the reality on the ground is rarely as clean as the briefing papers suggest. The central question remains, is the demand for unconditional surrender a masterstroke of clarity or a catastrophic error in judgment? As we look toward the next 12 days, the eyes of the world are on Tehran and the Litani River. We have seen the end of the Shadow War, but the direct war is only just beginning. We will be tracking every development, every strike, and every protest. This has been episode 1099 of My Weird Prompts. For more on the financial aspects of this conflict, go back and listen to episode 1009 on financial decapitation And for the lead up to these strikes, check out episode 1016. Thank you to my panel, and thank you for listening. We will see you in the next one. Stay safe.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth